What happens when Hollywood's most grounded star walks into the lion's den of daytime television and refuses to back down from one of its most notorious hosts? What you're about to witness is the moment Mark Wahlberg completely dismantled Joy Behar's entire worldview in front of millions of viewers, leaving her speechless and scrambling for damage control. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This was a masterclass in how to handle media bullies who think they can steamroll their guests. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe how this unfolds. The tension was palpable from the moment Mark Wahlberg stepped onto the View set. Joy Behar had been sharpening her claws all morning, having already made several snide remarks about Wahlberg during the opening segment. She had clearly done her homework, digging up every controversial moment from his past, every political stance that didn't align with her own liberal agenda. What she hadn't counted on was facing someone who wouldn't be intimidated by her usual tactics of interruption and condescension. As Wahlberg settled into his chair, straightening his jacket with the calm confidence of a man who had nothing to hide, Joy wasted no time launching her first attack. "So, Mark," she began with that familiar smirk that regular viewers knew meant trouble. "You've been very vocal about your faith recently. Some might say it's a bit hypocritical given your past behavior. How do you reconcile being this born-again Christian with some of the more questionable roles you've taken?" The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even they could sense that Joy was coming in hot, more aggressive than usual. Whoopi Goldberg shot her a warning glance, but Joy was already locked and loaded, ready to tear into her guest with the ruthless efficiency of a seasoned prosecutor. Mark's response was measured, his voice steady. "Well, Joy, I think the beauty of faith is that it's about redemption and growth. I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago, and I hope I'm not the same person I'll be 20 years from now. My faith has taught me to be honest about my mistakes and to try to be better every day." Joy leaned forward, sensing what she thought was weakness. "But don't you think it's convenient timing? Your career hits a few bumps and suddenly you find God. It seems like a pretty calculated move to me." The studio audience murmured, some clearly uncomfortable with the hostile tone Joy was taking. Mark's jaw tightened slightly, but his composure remained intact. This was exactly the kind of attack he had expected, the kind of cynical worldview that assumed every genuine moment was somehow manufactured for public consumption. "I found God long before any career bumps, Joy. But even if that weren't the case, I'm not sure why seeking something greater than yourself would be seen as calculated rather than human. Isn't that what we all do when we're struggling? Look for something to help us through." Joy wasn't satisfied with his reasonable response. She had come prepared for battle, and she wasn't about to let him off the hook with what she saw as generic celebrity talking points. "That's a nice soundbite, Mark, but let's talk specifics. You've made millions playing tough guys and action heroes, glorifying violence on screen, and now you want us to believe you're this peaceful, faithful family man. Which version of Mark Wahlberg are we supposed to believe?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The other hosts remained silent, letting Joy take the lead in what was clearly becoming more of an interrogation than an interview. Mark took a deep breath, and for a moment it seemed like he might retreat into the safe zone of diplomatic celebrity responses. Instead, he did something that caught everyone off guard. He smiled. Not the practiced Hollywood smile that audiences were used to seeing, but a genuine expression of someone who had just recognized a familiar pattern of behavior. "You know what, Joy? I think you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't which version of me you should believe. The question is why you seem so invested in not believing that people can change for the better. What is it about the idea of redemption that bothers you so much?" Joy's eyes widened slightly. She clearly hadn't expected him to turn the table so quickly to shift from defense to a gentle but pointed offense. "I'm not bothered by redemption, Mark. I'm bothered by phoniness. I'm bothered by celebrities who think they can rebrand themselves whenever it's convenient and expect everyone to just forget their past. And I'm bothered by people who seem determined to keep others trapped in their worst moments," Mark replied, his voice gaining strength. "You talk about my past like it's some kind of gotcha moment, but everyone in this room has things they're not proud of. The difference is most people don't have their mistakes broadcast for entertainment." The studio had gone completely quiet. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Joy, for perhaps the first time in years, found herself without an immediate comeback. She had expected to be dealing with a defensive celebrity trying to protect his image, not someone who was willing to challenge her fundamental approach to confrontation. I think there's a difference between accountability and public shaming, Mark continued, pressing his advantage. You seem to confuse the two. Accountability is about taking responsibility and making amends. Public shaming is about keeping people down so you can feel superior. Which one do you think you're doing right now? Joy's face flushed red. She wasn't used to being called out so directly, especially not by someone she had clearly underestimated. I think I'm doing my job, which is asking tough questions that our viewers want answered. No, Mark said quietly. I think you're doing what you always do. You're trying to tear someone down because it makes good television. But here's the thing, Joy. I'm not going to play that game with you. I'm here to talk about my work, my family, and yes, my faith. If you want to have a real conversation about any of those things, I'm all for it. But if you just want to score cheap points by bringing up things I've already addressed and made amends for, then maybe we should wrap this up now. The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted. Joy, who had started the interview as the predator, suddenly found herself in the uncomfortable position of being the one under scrutiny. The other hosts were watching with barely concealed fascination as their usually dominant colleagues struggled to regain control of the situation. Joy's nostrils flared as she realized her usual intimidation tactics weren't working. She had built her career on bulldozing guests who dared to push back. But Mark Wahlberg wasn't playing by the rules she had established over years of unopposed attacks. Sensing she was losing control, she decided to escalate with the kind of personal attack that had made her infamous. Let's talk about your political views, then, since you want to be so holier than thou. Joy snapped, her voice dripping with condescension. You supported certain candidates that I think most decent people would find abhorrent. How do you square that with this new Christian persona you're pushing? Mark's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He leaned back slightly, the movement of someone who had just recognized they were dealing with exactly the kind of person he had hoped to avoid. There it is, he said quietly, almost to himself. There's what? Joy demanded, clearly frustrated that her attack hadn't landed the way she intended. The real Joy Behar, Mark replied, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the studio lean forward. The one who thinks that anyone who doesn't share her exact political beliefs is somehow morally deficient. Tell me something, Joy. When did political disagreement become a character flaw? Joy's jaw dropped. She was used to celebrities cowering when she brought up politics, either desperately trying to appear neutral or scrambling to align themselves with her views. She wasn't prepared for someone who would challenge the premise of her question entirely. I never said that, Joy protested. But her voice lacked its usual conviction. You didn't have to say it, Mark responded. It's in every word you've spoken since I sat down. You've decided that because I don't see the world exactly the way you do, I must be either stupid, evil, or fake. There's no room in your worldview for the possibility that good people can look at the same information and come to different conclusions. The other hosts were now visibly uncomfortable. Sunny host was fidgeting with her papers, while Sarah Haynes kept glancing between Joy and Mark like she was watching a tennis match. Even Whoopi seemed unsure of how to intervene without making things worse for Joy. That's not true, Joy insisted, but her voice had lost its edge. I respect different viewpoints. Mark actually laughed, not mockingly, but with the kind of genuine amusement that comes from hearing something so obviously untrue. Joy, in the last 10 minutes, you've questioned my faith, my sincerity, my character, and my intelligence. All because I won't apologize for being who I am. If this is how you treat people you respect, I'd hate to see how you handle people you actually disagree with. Joy's face was now completely red. She was trapped between doubling down on her aggression and admitting that Mark had a point. Either choice would be a loss for her, and everyone in the studio could sense it. I think you're being overly sensitive, Joy tried, falling back on the classic tactic of gaslighting her opponent. Am I? Mark asked, his voice calm but firm. Let me ask you something, Joy. When was the last time you had a guest on this show who disagreed with you politically, and you didn't spend the entire interview trying to embarrass them or change their mind? When was the last time you actually listened to understand rather than listened to respond? The question hung in the air like a sword. Joy opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. She was clearly struggling to come up with an example, and her silence was more damning than any admission could have been. I'll make it easier, Mark continued, pressing his advantage. Can you name one conservative guest you've had on this show that you treated with the same respect you show your liberal guests? Just one. Joy's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before she managed to sputter. I treat all my guests fairly. Do you, though? Mark asked, his tone gentle but relentless. Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you have two completely different interview styles. One for people who agree with you, where you're warm and supportive and ask softball questions, and another for people like me, where you come out swinging from the first question, looking for any weakness you can exploit. The studio audience had gone completely silent. This wasn't the usual back and forth they were used to seeing on The View. This was a complete dismantling of one of the show's most aggressive hosts by someone who refused to be intimidated. I ask tough questions, Joyce said weakly, clearly grasping for any defense she could find. No, Mark replied, shaking his head. You ask gotcha questions. There's a difference. A tough question is designed to get information or insight. A gotcha question is designed to make someone look bad. Everything you've asked me today has been the latter. Joy looked around desperately at her co-hosts, clearly hoping for backup that wasn't coming. Whoopi was studying her hands intently while the others seemed fascinated by the ceiling or their shoes, for example. Mark continued, clearly not done making his point. Instead of asking me about my faith journey in a way that might actually inform your viewers, you immediately questioned whether it was genuine. Instead of asking about my political views to understand my perspective, you labeled them as abhorrent before I even had a chance to explain them. You're not interested in having a conversation, Joy. You're interested in having a confrontation. Joy's breathing had become noticeably shallow. She was experiencing something she hadn't felt in years on this set. The uncomfortable sensation of being completely outmaneuvered by someone she had underestimated. I think you're reading too much into my questions, she managed, but even she didn't sound convinced by her own defense. Mark smiled again, the same genuine expression that had caught Joy off guard earlier. Maybe I am. Or maybe you're so used to getting away with this kind of behavior that you don't even realize you're doing it anymore. Tell me something, Joy. Do you actually enjoy interviewing people who disagree with you? Or do you just enjoy making them uncomfortable? The question was delivered with such gentle curiosity that it was somehow more devastating than any accusation could have been. Joy found herself actually considering the question rather than reflexively defending against it. And what she found in that moment of honest self-reflection was clearly not comfortable. I enjoy challenging people, she said finally, but the fight had gone out of her voice. Challenging them or attacking them? Mark asked, because there's a difference there too. A challenge is meant to help someone grow or think differently. An attack is meant to hurt or diminish them. Which one do you think you've been doing today? Joy looked around the studio desperately, as if hoping someone would rescue her from this uncomfortable moment of truth. But her co-hosts were still avoiding eye contact, and the audience was hanging on every word of this unexpected reversal of power. The silence stretched on as Joy struggled to find an answer that wouldn't further expose her hypocrisy. Mark watched her with the patience of someone who had all day to wait for honesty, while the rest of the panel squirmed in their seats. Finally, Joy attempted one last desperate counterattack. You know what, Mark? I think you came here today with an agenda. I think you wanted to make me look bad because you don't like my politics, she said, her voice rising with false indignation. Mark's eyebrows raised slightly, and for the first time since the interview began, he looked genuinely surprised. Joy, do you hear yourself right now? You're accusing me of having an agenda when you literally started this interview by attacking my faith, my character, and my political views. I came here to talk about my new movie. You're the one who turned this into a political battlefield. Joy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She had painted herself into a corner so completely that any direction she moved would only make things worse. Let me ask you something else, Mark continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone who was genuinely curious about a fascinating psychological phenomenon. Do you actually think your viewers enjoy watching you berate guests? Do you think they tune in hoping to see you make people uncomfortable? Or do you think they might prefer to actually learn something about the people you interview? Joy's hands were visibly shaking now. She had built her entire career on the assumption that audiences loved conflict, that controversy equaled ratings. The possibility that she might be wrong about something so fundamental to her identity was clearly terrifying. Our viewers appreciate honesty, Joy said weakly, grasping for any remaining thread of justification. Your viewers, Mark repeated slowly. Or you, because from where I sit, it seems like you're the one who has a problem with honesty. You've spent this entire interview trying to catch me in some kind of contradiction or admission of guilt. But when I turn the mirror back on you, suddenly you're the victim. The camera operators were having a field day, capturing every micro-expression on Joy's face as she realized she was being completely dismantled on live television. Her usual smug confidence had evaporated, replaced by the kind of panic that comes from being exposed in front of millions of people. "I'm not a victim," Joy protested, but her voice cracked slightly on the words. "No, you're not," Mark agreed. "You're a bully. And like most bullies, you're not used to someone standing up to you. The problem is, Joy, bullying only works when your target is afraid of you. And I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of your questions, your insinuations, or your attempts to embarrass me. What I am is disappointed." Joy's face went completely white. "Disappointed?" "Yeah," Mark said, his voice softening with what sounded like genuine sadness. "Disappointed that someone with your platform, your influence, your opportunity to actually make a difference in people's lives, chooses to use it to tear people down instead of building them up. You could be asking questions that help your viewers understand different perspectives, that bridge divides, that bring people together. Instead, you're asking questions designed to create conflict and division." The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Even the producers in the control room seemed to have stopped breathing as they watched one of their hosts being systematically destroyed by a guest who had been invited on to promote a movie. "You want to know what I find really sad about all this?" Mark continued, leaning forward slightly. "I bet underneath all this anger and hostility, you're probably a decent person. I bet you have people in your life who love you, who see something in you that you don't show on this program. But you've created this persona, this character of the attack dog host, and now you're trapped in it. You can't have a normal conversation anymore because you've forgotten how Joy's eyes were actually welling up with tears. Whether from rage, humiliation, or the uncomfortable recognition that Mark might be right, it was impossible to tell. But for the first time in the entire interview, she looked genuinely human rather than like a media attack machine. "I don't know what you want me to say," Joy whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't want you to say anything," Mark replied gently. "I want you to think about something. Tonight, when you go home and you're away from the cameras and the audience and the pressure to be controversial, I want you to ask yourself a simple question. Are you proud of the person you were today? Not the host, not the character, but the person. Are you proud of how you treated another human being?" Joy's composure finally cracked completely. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she stared at Mark, unable to formulate any response that wouldn't make her look even worse than she already did. "Compassionate takedown in television history," his voice now barely above a whisper, staring in shock, but somehow the audience was completely still. "I forgive you for the camera operator, for the personal attacks, for trying to humiliate me on national television, straightening his jacket with the same calm confidence I understand that hurt people sat down. But more importantly, not to Joy someday you'll be able to forgive yourself for becoming someone you probably never intended to be. I genuinely hope you find some peace." The silence that followed was deafening. "I hope you'll remember that frozen in every public figure, tears streaming down politician, her face, every celebrity unable to respond to what might have been the most devastating and simultaneously. Maybe we could all try treating each other that way." He walked off the set without another word, leaving Joy sitting in stunned silence, her carefully constructed persona lying in ruins around her. The other hosts scrambled to regain control of the show, but the damage was done. In less than 30 minutes, Mark Wahlberg had done what years of criticism and controversy had failed to do. He had shown Joy Behar exactly who she had become, and the reflection was apparently too painful for her to bear. What did you think of Mark Wahlberg's masterful handling of Joy Behar's attack interview? Have you ever seen a celebrity completely dismantle a hostile host like that before? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And make sure to subscribe for more incredible moments when Hollywood stars refuse to back down from media bullies who think they can steamroll anyone who walks onto.